lots of different places I could jump in. Some could take 30 minutes, some could take only maybe 10 minutes. I don't know. Roger's back there looking at the time, I know. So I'll try and be quick. Maybe I'll pick up from where Ethan left. So we had this idea and called some friends. Matembe was the captain of the Zimbabwean team. Ethan had played for Highlanders, another friend, Kirk. And as soon as we got together, I could tell that we were onto something because those guys, everybody was so enthusiastic. Kirk was surfing in Hawaii, left his surfboard, never returned to Hawaii. He was in, Matembe was in, and so it felt like we had something going. So one of the first things we did was go back to Zimbabwe, and we met with all of our former teammates, Highlanders, and we had to find out what did they think. Were those guys in as well? And those guys were in too. And so then we were off and running. And I remember our first ever, my father-in-law, Dan Taylor's here, first ever fundraiser we had was in his back garden. I'd never given a public talk in my life, and had to stand up and tell these people what we were going to do. We raised, I think, $10,000, and I thought, well, this was going to be easy. And then the next night, at my sister-in-law's house, we raised $1,000, and I thought, oh, this might be a little bit harder. But that was us. And honestly, we had, at the beginning, the biggest thing was how do we get $500 to become a nonprofit? We had to, that was the check required to submit the paperwork for the 501c3. So anyway, I'm rambling now. So we went from that. We found the $500. Jason Hicks, our first ever treasurer, put that money up. And I probably thought it was money down the drain. But 19 years later, we've raised over $110 million. As Roger said, we've worked with 13 million kids. We have, I think, 100 partners in 60 countries now. And so the organization has, it's certainly done better than we would have ever expected. And I think some of the reasons that things went well, I think it's a simple idea, and I think it's a good idea. It's not rocket science, using soccer. And I think the other thing is that a lot of people have helped. So for example, there's so many people in this room that have been incredible help. So I think that maybe there's a third thing that we did too, which was we collected data and we published data, and we have invested in evaluation. So if there's a third thing, that would be it. So some of you know grassroots soccer well. Some of you don't know it at all. So you're maybe wondering, what do we do? So I guess a couple things. One thing is we look at data. Before we work with kids, we look at data. And so just to give you a couple of examples, if a man is circumcised, his chance of contracting HIV goes down by 60%. So what that means in Zimbabwe, for every 4 procedures you do, you prevent 1 HIV infection. Another example, some more data. The way HIV works is when you first get infected, your viral load is very high for about 2 months. And so if you have 2 sexual partners during that 2-month window, it's very likely that you're going to transmit the infection from one person to another. So having partners at the same time, the word is multiple concurrent partners, that also puts you at higher risk. And so those are things that people might not, they might think they know about HIV, but they might not, adolescents in Africa, they certainly don't know those things. Adolescents and adults in the US don't know those things. So we start out with some data. We take that data and we incorporate that into programs. And I'll give a quick example of a program in a second, but basically it's fun programs. You'll see some videos. It's on the field. It's fun. The activities are interactive. They're led by coaches, young people from the community who care about kids. And I think the importance of coaches is so important. So that's what we do. We look at data. We build these evidence-based programs for adolescents, and then we share it with other people, with partners, because we work with 1 million kids right now. We want to work with 10 million kids a year. The scale of the challenge and the needs means that we need to do more and more. So that's our goal. Let me just give a quick example, maybe, because last thing I want is people to leave tonight not having a good idea of what we do. So just to give you a quick example, So one sort of game that we would play, this is just one example. There are many, many examples. So you have a little outside, you have a soccer goal, you have a bunch of balls, there's a bunch of, adolescents, maybe 14, 15, 16 years old, and they're shooting the soccer ball, and there's a kid in goals. When the kid, and the coach who's there will say, okay, let's, time out, let's pause the game for a second. Let's imagine that every time you get scored on, that represents getting HIV, and you can no longer be a goalkeeper, you have to go to the back of the line. So that's the first thing. And so the game continues, and you have 3 and 4 people shooting a soccer ball at the same time, and there's a big goal, and the ball's flying in, and the goalkeeper is changing, and so this is representing people getting HIV. So then the coach will say, well, it seems like we're getting a lot of HIV, a lot of goals are going in. What could we do? And so the kids, the adolescents in the audience will say, they would say, well, why don't we have just one person shooting a soccer ball instead of having 4 or 5 people shooting, because it'll be easier to save if there's one person. So we say, well, what would that represent in your life? Well, that would represent having one sexual partner. Well, that's a good idea. So what's another thing we could do? So then the game goes on a little bit, and then what's another thing that we could do? So so one of the kids, so the coach might say, what happens when Cristiano Ronaldo gets fouled? Well, there's a free kick. So everyone knows about Cristiano Ronaldo and the free kicks. So what is there with, one of the kids will say there's a wall. So we have a wall. And what would the wall represent? It's a barrier, it's protection, so it represents using a condom. So a third thing that the coach will ask is, do any of you guys know about anything about circumcision? How does that, and maybe one of the kids knows, maybe one of the kids will say, I think it reduces HIV. And say, well, does anybody know how much it reduces HIV? And maybe the kid knows, maybe not, but the coach will say, well, 60%. So let's make the goal 60% smaller. And so now everybody gets to go in goals. You have one person shooting, you've got a wall, and you've got a goal now that's 60% smaller. And everybody goes in, and you go through all the kids, one goal is scored. And so it's a real physical representation and a very memorable way to learn. And that's the kind of thing that Grassroot Soccer does. So I'll stop there. Thank you.